Jake Peterson sat in the cramped waiting area of the Galactic Land Authority office, his worn baseball cap twisted between calloused hands. 3 months ago, he'd been running a failing cattle ranch outside Billings, Montana. Now he was on a space station orbiting a planet he couldn't even pronounce, hoping to start over. The office looked like a cross between a DMV and something out of a science fiction movie. Aliens of every shape and size filled the seats around him. A creature that resembled a walking tree sat to his left, its bark-like skin creaking every time it moved. Across the room, something with too many eyes and not enough legs was arguing with a receptionist about boundary disputes. Jake checked his account balance on his handheld device for the 100th time. After selling his ranch, his truck, and pretty much everything he owned except his clothes and his grandfather's pocket watch, he had exactly enough credits for a modest plot of land and supplies to last 6 months. His 12 head of cattle were in cryo storage on his transport ship, costing him money every day they stayed frozen. Human Peterson, Windows 7, a mechanical voice announced. Jake walked up to the counter where a blue-skinned alien sat behind a holographic display. The creature had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle pattern on its face, and its fingers were longer than seemed natural. A name tag identified it as a VRYNN, though Jake couldn't read the actual name. "I'm looking to purchase agricultural land," Jake said, sliding his credit chip across the counter. "Nothing fancy. Just need good water and enough space for a small herd." The clerk's eyes blinked one at a time, left to right, which Jake had learned meant it was thinking. "Budget range?" Jake told him the number. It wasn't much by galactic standards. The clerk's fingers danced across the holographic interface, and Jake watched dozens of property listings scroll past. Most were small plots on crowded colony worlds or marginal land on planets with difficult climates. Nothing looked promising. Then the clerk stopped scrolling. All 3 eyes focused on the screen. Its skin shifted to a slightly paler shade of blue. "There is one property," the clerk said slowly. 50,000 acres on Ashara Prime. Well within your budget. Significantly below market value, actually. Jake's heart jumped. 50,000 acres? His old ranch in Montana had been 800 acres, and he'd barely been able to afford that. What's the catch? The land is classified as a historical preservation zone. There are some cultural sensitivities from previous survey missions. The clerk pulled up images of rust-colored plains dotted with purple vegetation. A crystal-clear stream wound through rolling hills. The soil is excellent for Earth-style agriculture. The water is clean. Temperature range is comparable to your Montana region. Why is it so cheap? The clerk's tentacles twitched, wrapping around each other in a gesture Jake didn't recognize. The locals consider the area culturally significant. Some superstitions about the land. Nothing that should affect your operation. Jake studied the images. The land looked perfect. Maybe too perfect. But he'd been ranching long enough to know that every piece of property had drawbacks. Bad neighbors, difficult terrain, weird weather. If the only problem was some local superstition, he could live with that. Can I ask what kind of superstitions? Old stories. The area was surveyed 200 years ago and deemed unsuitable for standard colonization due to historical markers found on the surface. But there are no restrictions on agricultural use. The clerk pulled up the contract. The territory is called the Crimson Barrens. All mineral rights included. Water rights included. Full ownership, not a lease. Jake did the math in his head. With that much land, he could build a real operation. Maybe even bring other ranchers from Earth eventually, start a proper colony. The price was less than he'd paid for his truck back home. "I'll take it," Jake said. The clerk's skin turned a pale green color. Its eyes blinked rapidly, all at once this time. "You are certain? Perhaps you would like to review more options?" "I've been looking at options for 3 months. This is the best land I've seen at a price I can afford. Draw up the papers." The clerk hesitated, its fingers hovering over the interface. Then it nodded, which looked strange on a creature without a proper neck. "Very well. I will need your biosignature and credit authorization." Jake pressed his thumb to the scanning pad and watched his life savings transfer to the Galactic Land Authority. The clerk produced a data chip containing the property deed, coordinates, and survey information. The coordinates are programmed into this chip. Your transport can navigate directly to the property. The clerk slid the chip across the counter, then leaned forward slightly. "I must advise you, human, that the previous owner abandoned the claim after only 3 days. And the owner before that lasted less than a week." "Why?" "They reported unusual phenomena. Strange sounds at night. Equipment malfunctions. but nothing verifiable in official reports. The clerk straightened up. Likely just nerves. Humans are new to off-world ranching. Perhaps they were simply unprepared for the isolation. Jake pocketed the data chip. He'd spent plenty of nights alone on the Montana range, listening to coyotes howl and watching storms roll across the plains. He doubted an alien planet could be much lonelier than that. "Thanks for the warning," Jake said. "But I've dealt with worse than strange noises." As he walked toward the exit, Jake noticed the waiting area had gone quiet. Aliens of different species were staring at him. The tree creature made a sound like wind through branches. A small, furry alien with enormous ears was speaking rapidly to its companion in a language Jake's translator couldn't process. An elderly alien with 4 arms and wrinkled gray skin approached him near the door. It spoke in heavily accented English, bypassing the translator entirely. "You bought the Crimson Barrens." "That's right. That land is forbidden. Has been for longer than your species has had fire." Jake shifted his bag on his shoulder. "Then why was it for sale?" The old alien's 4 hands gestured in what might have been a shrug. "Bureaucracy makes fools of us all. But mark my words, human. That land is cheap for a reason. The architects left warnings. We ignore them at our peril." "Who are the architects?" But the old alien was already walking away, shaking its head. Jake stepped out of the office into the station's main corridor. Ships were arriving and departing through massive bay doors that opened directly to space. He could see Ashara Prime through the viewport, a green and brown planet wrapped in white clouds. His planet now. His land. Whatever warnings or superstitions came with it, Jake figured he could handle. He'd built a ranch from nothing once before. He could do it again. He just didn't realize yet that some warnings exist for very good reasons. The transport ship broke through Ashara Prime's atmosphere with a shudder that rattled Jake's teeth. He gripped the control stick, guiding the vessel toward the coordinates from his data chip. Below him, the Crimson Barrens spread out like a rust-colored ocean, broken only by patches of purple vegetation and the occasional rocky outcrop. Coming up on landing zone, the ship's computer announced in its flat, emotionless voice. Jake brought the transport down on a flat stretch of ground near a crystalline stream. The landing gear touched soil that had probably never felt the weight of a human boot before. He sat in the pilot's seat for a moment, just looking out at his new property. The sky was a deeper blue than Earth's, and the sun seemed slightly larger on the horizon. But the land itself felt familiar somehow. Rolling plains, distant hills, and that stream cutting through it all like a silver ribbon. He powered down the systems and headed to the cargo bay. His cattle were still in cryo storage, suspended in chambers that kept them perfectly preserved. Jake started the wake-up sequence and watched as the frost melted from the glass panels. His lead cow, a sturdy Hereford named Bessie, was the first to open her eyes. "Welcome to your new home, girl," Jake said, opening the chamber. One by one, his dozen cattle stumbled out onto the loading ramp. They looked confused at first, sniffing the alien air and testing the strange soil with their hooves. But within minutes, they were walking down to the purple grass like they'd been doing it their whole lives. Bessie took the first bite, chewed thoughtfully, then kept eating. The others followed her lead. Jake spent the afternoon setting up camp. He assembled 2 prefab shelter units, one for himself and one for storage. Solar panels went up to power his equipment. He tested the stream water with his portable analyzer and was pleased to find it cleaner than anything that came out of Montana wells. The cattle seemed to agree, drinking deeply before wandering back to graze. As he worked, Jake noticed something odd about the ground. Geometric shapes were carved into the rocky patches scattered across his property. Perfect triangles, precise circles, and complex patterns that looked like circuit boards. The lines were worn smooth by time but still clearly visible. He knelt beside one, running his fingers along the groove. It was about an inch deep and perfectly straight for hundreds of feet. "Hell of a property marker," Jake muttered. He made a mental note to ask about them next time he contacted the land authority. Probably some kind of survey markers from when the planet was first mapped. Still, they were impressive. Whatever tools had cut these lines had been seriously precise. The sun was setting when Jake finally stopped working. He fired up his portable stove and heated a ration pack, sitting on the ramp of his transport and watching his cattle settle in for the night. They huddled together near the stream, which was normal enough. Cows were herd animals. They felt safer in groups. But something about the way they were moving bothered him. They kept shifting, pressing closer together than usual. Their ears were twitching, heads turning like they were listening for something. Jake had been around cattle his entire life, and he knew nervous animals when he saw them. "Easy, girls," he called out. Just a new place. You'll get used to it. The temperature started dropping fast as darkness fell. Jake pulled on his heavy jacket and added thermal layers. The weather report had mentioned cold nights, but this was dropping faster than he'd expected. He checked his thermometer and saw it had already fallen 30 degrees in less than an hour. That's when he felt it. A vibration, so deep and low that he didn't really hear it so much as feel it in his chest. Like standing next to a massive engine, but the sound was coming from below. From the ground itself. Jake stood up, looking around. The cattle were definitely agitated now, lowing and pressing against each other. Bessie had her head up, eyes wide. Then the patterns started glowing. The geometric shapes carved into the rocks were lighting up with a soft blue luminescence. It started faint, barely visible in the twilight, but grew steadily brighter. Jake walked to the nearest pattern and knelt down. The light was coming from inside the carved lines, like someone had filled the grooves with glowing paint. Okay, that's new, Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. He grabbed his flashlight and walked the perimeter of his camp. Everywhere he looked, the patterns were glowing. They stretched across his entire property like a massive circuit board coming to life. The lines connected to each other, forming networks that pulsed with light in a rhythm that matched the vibration he felt through his boots. Jake's cattle were panicking now. They were making sounds he'd never heard from them before, deep bellows of fear. He ran to them, trying to calm them with his voice, but they barely seemed to notice him. Their attention was fixed on the ground, on the lights that were growing brighter with each passing minute. The humming grew louder. Jake could hear it now, not just feel it. It was rising from beneath the soil like the planet itself was waking up. He pulled out his communicator to call the land authority, but the device was dead. Not just powered off but completely unresponsive, like something was jamming the signal. Come on, Jake muttered, slapping the communicator against his palm. The lights pulsed brighter, and for just a moment, Jake thought he saw something in the pattern. Not random geometric shapes but something deliberate. A design. A message maybe, in a language written in light and stone. He looked up at his transport ship. The exterior lights were flickering. His solar panels were showing irregular power readings. Everything electronic was being affected by whatever was happening beneath his feet. Jake made a decision. He herded his cattle closer to the transport, using the ship as a windbreak and barrier. They didn't want to move at first, rooted in place by fear, but eventually they followed him. He got them settled as best he could, then climbed back into the transport and sealed the door. Inside, the humming was muffled but still present. Jake sat in the pilot's seat, staring out at his property. The geometric patterns now covered every visible inch of ground, glowing bright enough to read by. They pulsed in waves, light racing along the lines like electricity through wires. He thought about the old aliens' warning at the land authority. About the previous owners who'd lasted only days before abandoning their claims. About the word forbidden, and the architects, whoever they were. Jake checked his weapons locker and found his rifle. He'd brought it for predators, assuming alien planets might have dangerous wildlife. Now he wasn't sure what he was dealing with, but having the rifle close made him feel slightly better. The night stretched on. The humming never stopped, rising and falling like breathing. The lights continued their pulsing pattern. Jake's cattle eventually exhausted themselves and lay down, though they never truly seemed to rest. And Jake himself sat in the pilot's seat, watching his property glow like a landing strip, wondering what exactly he'd bought. He didn't sleep. Every time he started to drift off, the humming would shift in pitch or the lights would pulse brighter, snapping him back to alertness. By the time the sun started rising, Jake was running on pure adrenaline and cheap coffee from his emergency supplies. As daylight spread across the Crimson Barrens, the lights faded. The humming decreased to barely perceptible levels. The geometric patterns returned to being simple carved lines in the rock, looking ancient and harmless in the morning sun. Jake's cattle stood up, shaking themselves like nothing had happened. They walked down to the stream to drink, then started grazing again. Jake stepped out of the transport, exhausted and confused. In the daylight, everything looked normal. Beautiful, even. Just a ranch on an alien planet with good grass and clean water. But he knew what he'd experienced. And he knew it would happen again when night fell. Jake woke to the sound of panicked bellowing. He'd finally crashed around noon after staying awake all night, and now the afternoon sun was beating down on his transport. He stumbled out of the pilot's seat, grabbed his hat, and rushed outside. "Bessie? Girls?" he called out, counting heads. 11 cattle grazed peacefully near the stream. One was missing. "Damn it," Jake muttered, shading his eyes and scanning the horizon. His property was huge, and a wandering cow could be anywhere. But the bellowing was close, maybe a few hundred yards away. He grabbed his canteen and started jogging toward the sound. He found the problem quickly. Near the eastern edge of his surveyed property line, a section of ground had collapsed inward, creating a hole about 20 feet across. His steer, a young bull he'd named Rusty, was down there somewhere, and the bellowing echoed up from the darkness. Jake approached the edge carefully, testing the stability of the surrounding ground with each step. The soil here was different from the rest of his property, more like compacted clay than natural earth. When he peered over the edge, his headlamp beam disappeared into blackness that went down farther than he could see. "Rusty, you okay down there, buddy?" The bellowing continued, which meant the steer was alive at least. Jake ran back to his transport and grabbed his climbing gear. He'd done some recreational rock climbing back in Montana, never thinking those skills would come in handy on an alien planet. He set up an anchor point on a solid rock outcrop and clipped his rope through the descender. "Hang tight, Rusty. I'm coming down." Jake rappelled into the hole, his boots scraping against walls that definitely weren't natural rock. His headlamp illuminated smooth metallic surfaces covered in symbols that looked like the geometric patterns on the surface, except these glowed faintly even in daylight. The walls were warm to the touch, and he could feel that same deep humming vibration he'd experienced the night before. The descent took longer than expected. Jake had dropped maybe 60 feet when his boots finally touched solid ground. He unclipped from the rope and looked around, his jaw dropping at what he saw. He was standing on a platform overlooking a chamber so massive his headlamp couldn't reach the far walls. The space had to be the size of an airplane hangar, maybe bigger. Technology filled every surface, devices, and panels that hummed with energy. Conduits ran along the walls like veins, pulsing with that same blue light from the geometric patterns. And in the center of it all stood cylindrical structures that reached from floor to ceiling, each one easily 30 feet tall. "Holy hell," Jake whispered. Rusty was on the floor below the platform, standing on what looked like a walkway. The steer was scared but unhurt, probably having slid down the same way Jake had climbed. Jake found a ramp leading down and hurried to his animal. "Easy, boy. Let's get you out of here." But as he approached Rusty, the entire chamber lit up. Holographic displays flickered to life all around him, projecting symbols and diagrams into the air. Panels on the walls activated, screens showing information in languages Jake didn't recognize. The humming grew louder, and the cylindrical structures in the center began to glow. Jake froze. The technology was responding to him, to his presence. His universal translator, the small device clipped to his collar that every human got when they joined the galactic community, started working overtime. Words began forming in his vision, projected directly onto his eye through the neural link. Containment facility. Architect construct 2477. Warning, biological activity detected. Containment facility. Jake said aloud. Containing what? More displays activated. A massive holographic map appeared in the center of the chamber, showing the underground structure in detail. It extended for miles beneath his property, level after level of chambers and corridors all focused on a central point deep below where he stood. That central chamber pulsed with red light on the map. Jake approached the holographic display carefully. His translator kept processing information, feeding him data faster than he could fully comprehend. This place was old, incredibly old. The construction dated back thousands of years, maybe more. And it was all built by something called the architects. He touched one of the control panels, and the interface responded immediately. His translator struggled with the complex technical readouts, but certain phrases came through clearly. Stasis field. Containment protocols. Biological hazard. Stasis field integrity, 73% and declining. Declining? Jake said. That doesn't sound good. He navigated through more menus, his rancher's practical mind trying to understand what he was looking at. This was some kind of prison, that much was clear. Something was being held here in stasis, kept in a suspended state. And whatever it was, the systems keeping it locked up were failing. Another alert flashed across his vision, unauthorized life signs detected. Containment protocols destabilizing. Jake's blood went cold. His life signs. His presence here was causing the system to malfunction. And Rusty's too, probably. The facility wasn't designed for Earth biology, and their very presence was disrupting the carefully balanced containment systems. Okay, we need to leave. Right now. He grabbed Rusty's halter and started leading the steer back toward the platform. But his mind was racing. If just being here for a few minutes was causing problems, What about his camp on the surface? What about his cattle grazing up above? How long had they been destabilizing this facility? Jake found a cargo lift near the platform, big enough to accommodate his steer. The controls were alien but intuitive enough. He got Rusty onto the lift and activated it, riding up toward the surface together. As they rose, Jake looked back at the chamber below. The red light at the center of the holographic map was pulsing faster now, like a heartbeat that was accelerating. They emerged in the collapsed section, and Jake quickly rigged a harness to lift Rusty out with his climbing rope. It took 20 minutes of hard work, but he finally got the steer back on solid ground. Rusty immediately bolted back toward the rest of the herd, wanting nothing to do with the hole. Jake stood at the edge of the collapse, staring down into darkness that now terrified him. He'd bought this land cheap because it was forbidden. The old alien had warned him. The clerk had tried to discourage him. And now he understood why. He wasn't just a rancher who'd gotten a good deal. He was sitting on top of an ancient prison, and his very presence was breaking it open. Jake ran back to his transport and immediately tried his communicator. Still dead. Whatever was interfering with electronics was stronger now, probably because he'd activated systems down below. He climbed into his ship and tried the main communications array. Static. He boosted the power and tried again, sending out a general distress call on all frequencies. This is Jake Peterson on Ashara Prime, Crimson Barrens territory. I need immediate assistance. I've discovered an underground facility on my property. It's some kind of containment structure, and it's failing. If anyone can hear this, I need help. I need someone who understands architect technology. He repeated the message a dozen times, hoping something would get through the interference. Then he grabbed his rifle, not because he thought it would do any good against ancient alien technology, but because holding it made him feel slightly less helpless. Jake walked back to the collapse site and set up warning markers around it, using spare equipment from his transport. He couldn't risk any more cattle falling in. He couldn't risk going down there again himself. Every time something living entered that facility, it made the situation worse. As the sun started setting, Jake watched the geometric patterns on his property begin to glow again. But this time, they were brighter than before. The humming started earlier, and it was louder. The containment facility was accelerating its failure, and Jake had no idea how long it would take before whatever was locked down there broke free. He gathered his cattle close to the transport, keeping them as far from the collapse as possible. They seemed to sense his fear because they stayed together without wondering, all of them watching him with those big, trusting eyes. "I'm sorry, girls," Jake said quietly. "I think I made a real mistake bringing us here." His communicator crackled suddenly, making him jump. A voice came through, heavily distorted by static but understandable. "Mr. Peterson, this is Dr. Velis responding to your distress call. I'm a historian specializing in architect sites. I'm currently 3 hours away but coming as fast as possible. Whatever you do, stay away from the facility. Don't let anyone or anything enter it. Do you understand?" Jake grabbed the communicator. "I understand. But what is this place? What's down there?" The static increased, and for a moment he thought he'd lost the connection. Then Dr. Velis's voice came back, grave and clear. "You found a tomb, Mr. Peterson. And tombs should stay closed." Dr. Velis's ship touched down just as the twin moons of Ashara Prime were rising. Jake had been pacing near his transport for hours, watching the glowing patterns on his property grow brighter with each passing minute. The historian's vessel was small and streamlined, built for speed rather than cargo. The boarding ramp lowered, and out stepped a creature that looked like an upright salamander covered in silver scales that caught the moonlight. "Mr. Peterson," Dr. Velis said, her voice coming through a translator device attached to her collar. "Show me the site immediately." Jake led her to the collapsed section, now clearly visible thanks to the blue glow emanating from below. Dr. Velis stood at the edge, her large eyes reflecting the light. She pulled out scanning equipment and began taking readings, her scaled hands moving quickly across the holographic displays. "How long were you inside the facility?" she asked without looking up. "Maybe 20 minutes total. I went down to rescue my steer." "And your cattle have been on the surface for how long?" "About 30 hours now." Dr. Velis made a sound like wind through dry leaves. Her scales darkened from silver to a dull gray. "That explains the accelerated degradation. The containment field has dropped to 68%. When you first contacted me, it was at 73. "What does that mean?" Jake asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew. "It means we have very little time." Dr. Velis turned to face him, and Jake saw something in her alien eyes that looked like fear. "Mr. Peterson, do you know anything about the architects?" "Just what I saw on the displays down there. They built this place a long time ago. 200,000 years ago, to be precise. The architects were the dominant species in this region of the galaxy. They were scientists, explorers, and when necessary, prison wardens." Dr. Velis gestured to the glowing patterns around them. "This entire planet is a prison. One of 17 that we know of." Jake felt like the ground was tilting beneath him. "A prison for what?" "Come. I'll show you." Dr. Velis produced a hovering light drone and sent it down into the collapse. She pulled up a holographic display showing the drone's feed, and they descended virtually into the chamber Jake had discovered earlier. The historian navigated the drone expertly, moving through corridors Jake hadn't explored, going deeper into the facility. The architects encountered many species in their exploration of the galaxy, Dr. Velis explained as they watched the drone descend. Most were peaceful or at least manageable. But approximately 200,000 years ago, they found something that terrified them enough to abandon their principles of peaceful coexistence. The drone entered a massive chamber, and Jake's breath caught. The room was filled with cylindrical containers, hundreds of them, each one glowing with that pulsing red light. Inside the containers, barely visible through the energy fields, were shapes. Living things suspended in time. They called them the Devourers, Dr. Velis continued. A species unlike anything else in known biology. They don't just eat. They consume. Entire ecosystems, whole biospheres, everything organic and most things that aren't. A single devourer landing on a populated planet could strip it of all life within weeks. Jake stared at the shapes in the containers. They looked almost insect-like but wrong in ways he couldn't quite define. Too many limbs in places that didn't make sense. Mouths that seemed to open in multiple dimensions. Just looking at them made his stomach turn. The architects tried everything to stop them, Dr. Velis said. Weapons, biological agents, even attempting communication. Nothing worked. The Devourers couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be killed by conventional means, and reproduced faster than they could be contained. So the architects built these prisons. They lured the Devourers to quarantined worlds, trapped them in stasis fields powered by the planet's own core, and sealed them away. And then what happened to the architects? They disappeared. No one knows why or how. They simply vanished from the galaxy, leaving behind these facilities and warnings in every known language. Stay away. Do not disturb. Forbidden territory. Dr. Velis looked at Jake. Every spacefaring civilization that discovered these sites added their own warnings. For 200,000 years, every species has known to avoid places like the Crimson Barrens. Every species except humans, Jake said quietly. Your people are new to the galactic community. Only 5 years since first contact. The translation of the quarantine protocols into your databases must have failed somehow. A filing error, a corrupted data transfer, something mundane and bureaucratic that has led to something catastrophic. Jake felt sick. The land authority sold me a prison planet. They sold you a small section of a prison planet, not understanding what it was. The bureaucrat who processed your claim probably had no idea what the historical preservation markers actually meant. Dr. Velis pulled the drone back, showing the holographic map of the entire facility. The containment field is generated by a network of quantum processors distributed throughout the underground structure. They are powered by geothermal energy and designed to last for millions of years. So what's going wrong? The system was designed by the architects for their own biology. It recognizes their life signs, adjusts for their presence. But Earth biology is completely foreign to it. Your electromagnetic signature, your thermal output, even the bacteria you carry, all of it is confusing the senses. The facility thinks there's a contamination event occurring, a biological breach. It's attempting to adjust the containment protocols, but every adjustment creates new instabilities. Jake looked at his cattle, peacefully grazing in the distance despite the chaos they were unknowingly causing. So my cows are breaking an ancient prison just by existing here. Essentially, yes. And you've made it worse by entering the facility directly. Your presence triggered active response protocols. The AI running this place is now fully awake and attempting to deal with what it perceives as a critical emergency. Can we just leave? If I pack up my cattle and go, will the facility stabilize? Dr. Velis was quiet for a moment, checking her readings. Under normal circumstances, perhaps. But look at the degradation rate. We're losing 1% integrity every few hours. Even if you left immediately, the damage is done. The facility has been destabilized beyond its ability to self-correct. The quantum processes are failing. How long do we have? At current rates? 3 days, maybe 4, before the stasis fields collapse completely. Jake ran his hand through his hair, his mind racing. Can we evacuate? Get people off the planet? Mr. Peterson, you don't understand. If the Devourers wake, evacuation won't matter. There are over 300 specimens in the chamber below us. They will spread across Ashara Prime within days, consuming everything. They'll find ways off the planet, hitching rides on ships, spreading through trade routes. Within months, they could reach Earth. The weight of what she was saying hit Jake like a physical blow. His stupid decision to buy cheap land, his desperation to start over, it had put billions of lives at risk. Not just human lives but every living thing in this part of the galaxy. There has to be something we can do, Jake said. Some way to fix this. Dr. Velis started to respond, then stopped. Her scanner was beeping urgently. She looked at the readings, her scales shifting through several colors. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. That's unusual, she said. What? The facility's AI is attempting to establish communication. It's never done that before. In all recorded history of architect sites, the AIS have never initiated contact with other species. She adjusted her equipment. It's requesting a direct interface. With who? With you, Mr. Peterson. They went back to the edge of the collapse. Dr. Velis set up a holographic communication terminal, linking it to the facility's systems below. After a moment, symbols began appearing in the air, ancient writing that Jake's translator struggled to process. Then, slowly, words formed in English. Solution detected. Analysis complete. Human biology presents unique properties. What does that mean? Jake asked. More words appeared. Earth origin organisms contain enzyme combinations not present in galactic database. Synthesis possible. Permanent neutralization of hostile biological entities achievable. Dr. Velis gasped, her scales flashing bright silver. It's found a solution. After 200,000 years, it's found a way to neutralize the Devourers. Using what? The AI responded, human genetic material. Earth livestock biological compounds. Probability of success, 94.7%. Jake looked at his cattle, then back at the words floating in the air. It wants to use us? Me and my cows? Your biology is unique, Dr. Velis said, excitement creeping into her voice. Earth evolved completely separately from galactic life. You produce enzymes, proteins, compounds that exist nowhere else in known space. The AI has analyzed your presence and found something it can use. Confirmation, the AI wrote. Procedure will require complete biological extraction. All Earth origin livestock must be processed. Human subject must undergo genetic harvesting. Complete extraction, Jake repeated. That means killing my cattle. And genetic harvesting from me, that doesn't sound pleasant. Dr. Velis checked her scanner. The procedure would be dangerous. These systems weren't designed for human physiology. There would be risks. Risk assessment for human subject. 31.4% probability of critical organ failure. Jake laughed, but there was no humor in it. So I've got a 1 in 3 chance of dying. But a 95% chance of saving billions of lives, Dr. Velis said quietly. Jake stood at the edge of the collapsed section, staring down into the glowing chamber below. Behind him, his cattle grazed peacefully under the alien stars, completely unaware that their lives had just become the potential salvation of billions. Dr. Velis was still reading through the technical specifications the AI had provided, her scales shifting colors as she processed the information. Walk me through this, Jake said. Explain it like I'm 5 years old. Dr. Velis looked up from her scanner. The Devourers are biological organisms, but their cellular structure is unlike anything else in the galaxy. They can break down and consume almost any form of matter by releasing specialized enzymes. The architects tried for decades to find a counteragent, something that could neutralize those enzymes. They failed. But something in my blood can do it. Not just your blood. It's a combination of factors. Humans produce a protein called defensin in your immune system. Your cattle produce similar compounds. Earth also has unique bacteria in your gut biome that create certain acids. Individually, none of these things are remarkable. But Earth evolved in complete isolation from galactic life. Your biology took a completely different path. Jake kicked at the dirt. and together, these things can stop the devourers. The AI believes it can synthesize them into a compound that will break down the devourers at a molecular level. Not just kill them but completely neutralize them, render them into inert organic matter. It would be permanent. They could never regenerate or reproduce. So what's the process? Dr. Velis hesitated. Your cattle would need to be euthanized. Their organs, bone marrow, tissues, everything would be processed through the facility's biosynthesizers. It would take approximately 6 hours to extract and refine the necessary compounds from 12 animals. Jake felt his throat tighten. He'd raised most of these cattle from calves. Bessie had been with him for 8 years, through the worst times on his Montana ranch. And me? You would be placed in an extraction chamber. The AI would need samples from multiple organ systems, bone marrow, cerebrospinal fluid, and a continuous blood supply during the synthesis process. The architects designed these systems for their own biology, which was far more resilient than humans. The chamber will try to keep you alive, but it's not optimized for your physiology. 31% chance of dying, Jake said. The AI's best estimate, yes. Jake walked over to his cattle. Bessie raised her head as he approached, chewing contentedly on the purple grass. He scratched behind her ears the way she'd always liked. The other cows gathered around him, familiar with the routine of their rancher checking on them in the evening. I brought you guys here, Jake said quietly. Promised you a better life on a new planet. Some promise that turned out to be. He thought about his grandfather, who'd started the family ranch back in the 1950s. The old man had worked that land through droughts and blizzards, through cattle diseases and market crashes. He'd always said that ranching wasn't just a job, it was a responsibility. You took care of your herd, and sometimes that meant making hard choices. Jake had never imagined a choice this hard. He walked back to Dr. Velis. If I say no? If we just evacuate and let whatever happens happen? The devourers will wake in 3 days. They'll consume Ashara Prime within 2 weeks. They'll spread to neighboring systems within months. We can try to mount a defense, quarantine planets, but we have no weapons that work against them. That's why the architects built these prisons in the first place. We'll lose worlds, Dr. Peterson. Billions of lives across dozens of species. And if I say yes? If we do this and it works? Then the devourers are gone forever. Not just contained but eliminated. The threat that terrified the architects enough to build 17 prisons across the galaxy would be ended by a rancher from Montana and his 12 cows. Jake laughed, and this time there was a hint of real humor in it. That's going to be one hell of a story. You're actually considering this. Lady, I don't see that I have much choice. Jake looked up at the stars, wondering which one was Earth's sun. I came out here for a fresh start. Figured I'd build something, maybe bring out other ranches eventually, start a real colony. Instead, I bought a prison planet and broke it by accident. If I can fix my mistake, even if it costs me everything, that's what I have to do. You're very brave. I'm really not. I'm scared out of my mind. But my grandfather used to say that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do the right thing even when you are scared. Jake took off his hat and ran his hand through his hair. How long will the procedure take? 18 hours for the full synthesis and application. You'll be in the extraction chamber for most of that time. And my cattle. The facility has humane termination protocols. They won't suffer. Jake nodded slowly. Okay. Let's do this before I come to my senses and change my mind. They worked through the night preparing. Dr. Velis coordinated with the facility's AI, setting up the biosynthesis chambers and calibrating them for Earth biology as best she could. Jake spent time with each of his cattle, saying goodbye in his own way. He recorded a message to be sent back to Earth, explaining what happened and why he'd made this choice. He wasn't sure anyone would understand, but he wanted them to know. As dawn approached, they began. The facility had a specialized chamber for large organic processing, designed by the architects for whatever purposes ancient aliens needed. Dr. Velis modified the protocols to be as painless as possible. Jake led his cattle down one at a time, using the cargo lift. Each one followed him trustingly, and each one went to sleep before they knew what was happening. Bessie was the last. She looked at Jake with those big, gentle eyes, and he had to wipe tears from his face. You were a good cow, Bessie. Best I ever had. I'm sorry it ended like this. When it was done, and all 12 cattle were being processed by machines older than human civilization, Jake prepared himself for his part. The extraction chamber looked like something between a medical pod and a coffin. Dr. Velis helped him inside, attaching monitoring equipment and intravenous lines. The AI will keep you sedated for most of this, she said. You may experience some pain when you wake, but the chamber will administer medication. If I don't make it, Jake said, make sure people know. Not that I was a hero or anything stupid like that. Just make sure they know why. Make sure they understand that sometimes the right choice is the hard one. I'll make sure, Dr. Velis promised. The chamber sealed, and Jake felt the sedation taking effect. The last thing he saw was the holographic display showing the biosynthesis process beginning, his cattle's genetic material combining with his own, creating something new. Something that could save the galaxy. He woke twice during the process. The first time, pain shot through every nerve in his body like he was being torn apart from the inside. Machines hummed around him, extracting and refining and synthesizing. He screamed until the sedation pulled him back under. The second time was calmer. He could see through the chamber's transparent panel. Dr. Velis stood at a control station, monitoring everything. Beyond her, holographic displays showed the Devourer containment chambers. The synthesized compound was being introduced into the stasis fields, molecules designed by an ancient AI and built from Earth biology doing what nothing else in the galaxy could do. The Devourers were dissolving. Their impossible cellular structures were breaking down, unable to withstand the compound that shouldn't exist. 200,000 years of imprisonment ending not with escape but with permanent neutralization. Jake smiled and let the darkness take him again. When he finally woke for real, the pain was manageable. Dr. Velis was beside the chamber immediately, her scales bright silver with relief. You survived, she said. The AI estimated a 31% mortality risk, but you beat the odds. Did it work? Jake's voice was hoarse. See for yourself. She helped him out of the chamber, and Jake stood on shaky legs. The holographic displays showed the containment chambers below, but the red light was gone. The Devourers were nothing but inert organic sludge, completely neutralized. No threat to anyone ever again. It worked, Dr. Velis confirmed. You did it, Mr. Peterson. You and your cattle solved a problem that defeated the architects themselves. Jake nodded, feeling empty and exhausted and strangely at peace. What happens now? Now the Galactic Council deals with their catastrophic filing error. They've already been in contact. You're being granted full ownership of Ashara Prime, the entire planet, not just your original claim. They're also commissioning a research station to study the facility and the architect technology. And they want me to run it. They're insisting on it, actually. The human who saved the galaxy from the Devourers probably has some political capital to spend. Jake laughed, which hurt but felt good anyway. I just wanted to be a rancher. You still can be. Ashara Prime has millions of acres of good grazing land. You can import more cattle from Earth, build the ranch you dreamed of. You'll just have a research station on your property and probably become the most famous human in the galaxy. Over the following weeks, as Jake recovered and the Galactic Council scrambled to manage the situation, ships began arriving at Ashara Prime. Scientists from dozens of species wanted to study the facility and the solution that had ended the Devourer threat. The story spread across the galaxy faster than light, the tale of a human rancher who'd accidentally bought a prison planet and then saved everyone by sacrificing everything he owned. Jake imported more cattle from Earth, better stocked this time with the compensation money the council provided. He built a proper ranch house on the surface, far from the sealed facility below. The geometric patterns still glowed at night, but now they seemed beautiful rather than threatening, a reminder of what had been prevented. Sometimes, standing on his porch and looking at the stars, Jake thought about Bessie and the others. He'd built a memorial for them near the stream, 12 stones arranged in a circle. It seemed like the least he could do for the cattle that helped save the galaxy. He'd come to Ashara Prime looking for a fresh start, for land cheap enough that a struggling rancher could afford. He'd gotten that and so much more. The Crimson Barrens weren't forbidden anymore. They were just home. And sometimes, that was enough.